and we actually travelled on the Ffestiniog Railway in an open wagon filled with straw.
Really?
And halfway up, they would put us into a siding. We had our tea, and then we were, after the train had gone back, we were allowed to push the wagon back down again. And I can see my father in uniform, of course, because the track it didn't always run.
No.
So he had to get out and push, and then of course he got left behind.
And what year was that? That was 19...
It was the year before D-Day, so it would be
43.
1943.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And that was your first sort of connection with the railways in North Wales, yes?
Yes. And then I was waiting to go into the Air Force in 52, and I went down to London to a model railway exhibition and saw a slate wagon on a bit of track. Grass on one side and stone on the other, and I couldn't think what it meant. And the young man came up to me and said, "Are you interested?" I was interested in what? And he says, "We've taken over this railway, and for 15 shillings you can be a member and to get a magazine." I couldn't get my money out fast enough.
Oh, wonderful! And that was what year when that happened?
That's the Ffestiniog.
That was a Ffestiniog,
yes.
And then
51.
52.
Oh,
Because that was the year I went into the Air Force.
Right, yes.
And then I saw a notice in the magazine applying for membership. And in that was 54, wasn't it? Yes. Gilbert's first.
Oh, you're talking of the FR, though.
For the FR,
Yeah, the FR
yes.
was 54.
54.
So
And,
where were you living at this time? Where,
I was in the Air Force, of course.
so you're all over?
Yeah, actually, I was living in Whitby. and coming right across England,
That's quite a journey, yes.
By train, yes. That was quite exciting. And then in 1954, in the probably late September, I was on leave here, and I walked up the track, and who should I see but Michael here, and Alan Garraway, and a chap called Heath Humphreys.
Now,
That was October the 23rd, 1954.
Yes.
now, I want to come back to the two of you meeting, but just tell us a little bit about, for people that don't know, who was Alan and who was Humphrey? So,
Oh, Alan Garraway
yes.
was the manager.
Yes.
Well, no, he wasn't then,
Not
of
then,
course.
no.
But he was the spark, really, the fire behind the railway at that stage.
Behind the restoration of the railway, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he was senior loco apprentice on BR Eastern Region. His father was shedmaster or something at Cambridge. R.H.R. Galloway.
So what led up to you, Michael, ending up at this meeting at the crossing in 1954?
Oh, well, I first came here, Tunbulk, in 1948.
Really?
Of course, it was total dereliction. And Bessie Jones was in the house.
Yes, yeah.
And I was with an aunt of mine. I always remember Auntie said to Bessie Jones, "Have you any eggs?" Because there were hens all over the place. "No," she said, "no eggs, no eggs." Because she didn't know us, you see. And
So were you just on a holiday at that point?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, well, Auntie had friends in Ffestiniog.
Right.
And he worked in the Ffestiniog quarry.
Okay.
Of course,
yeah.
the wonderful introduction was on about the second or third evening after he'd come back from work. He said, "You're interested in this railway? I can see it. It was closed 2 years then. Would you like to walk down it?" "Oh, yes."
And what sort of age would you have?
14.
14.
So we set off, just he and I, in the evening from Glenpush,
Yes.
and walked all the way down the track and through the Mowen Tunnel
Oh, wonderful.
to Tunbulk. And of course, he said that he was used to tunnels in the quarry.
Did you have your arm round his shoulder?
Yes,
and walk on
he said,
the track.
"No, when you're
rail.
in the quarry, in tunnels and places, you walk on the railhead So he was walking on one railhead and I was on the other, linked over. And we
yes.
got right through without stumbling. Of course, we got a shower under the 3 shafts.
Yes. But what an experience for a 14-year-old.
And then we got to Coed y Bleiddiau, and this was a fascinating looking place. And the door was not exactly a job; it wasn't locked.
So you were able to go in and have a look round.
Candles on the. It was very little furniture, but there were some candles on the table. It was a sort of eerie experience, and of course, only later did I learn of these strange people like Kim Philby. And it has been suggested Lord Hoare.
Allegedly, yes,
Lord
allegedly.
Well, it was Bessie Jones said that she was quite sure that she'd seen Lord Hoare. But Bessie Jones, you see, my first introduction to the Ffestiniog Railway at all, I would say, was my father smoked senior service cigarettes.
I remember them.
And they had lovely cards in the packet. And this would be 1939, I should think.
Yeah.
And there were glossy black and white prints, about 4 inches by 3. They're probably collectible cards.
Yes.
And there was one, you see, of the Ffestiniog Railway with the station mistress at Tannabuch handing the single line token to the fireman.
In her Welsh costume?
In her Welsh costume. And of course this attracted me, and this double engine. And this would be in 1939 when I was 5. And so I've had this love of the Ffestiniog Railway, really, ever since then.
You don't still have that card, do you, by any chance?
You know, I've been looking for it and I can't find it. But it's a well-known card in the series from the senior service cigarettes.
And these would have been photographs rather than...
There were
black and white
glossy pictures, a series
Fascinating.
of them. So, but I suppose in another respect, my father wasn't in the least interested in railways. It's often they often say, how did come this love? But when I was 3, on my 3rd birthday, I might tell you, I travelled 70 miles on narrow gauge trains.
Really?
70 miles.
That's a good distance.
We were staying at Kirkmichael in the Isle of Man.
Yes.
And we travelled on my birthday to Port Eyre in and back, which was a long way to Douglas, and changing trains and then all the way back, and it's 70 miles. 68 miles.
Can you remember much of that journey?
Very vague little bits. The father unfortunately didn't make a note of the locos, so I'd love to know what the engines were. They're probably some of the engines I never have seen in more modern times. But that was a start to the narrow gauge.
And having had this walk through the Morwyn Tunnel later on when you're 14, what was your next connection with the railway?
Well, of course, Auntie was very game because she had a bad leg, but we walked from here up to the Allt, and then she said, I've had enough of this, and she certainly wouldn't. We didn't get to the tunnel. She couldn't have gone through the tunnel.
Right.
And we couldn't find the path down to the road because we were getting a Crosville bus then back to Blaenau, you see, and we stumbled and fell, and we had an awful time in this wood. So the words "the Allt" became a sort of it became a family byword. But you see, I'd got so hooked on the whole thing that in October 1948, the school half term, I persuaded my friend, who's still alive in Anglesey, and we're both 87. He and I got on our bikes for youth hostels, and we cycled we lived near Altrincham in Cheshire,
right,
and we cycled to Corwen and Cynwyd, where there was a youth hostel, the Old Mill at Cynwyd. And we cycled there on the Saturday, the last Saturday.
That's a fair old cycle to start with.
Saturday in October 1948, and we stopped to look at the remnants of the Eaton Hall Railway, where it crossed the road near Chester, as we were cycling from Chester to Wrexham, you see.
It was 15 inch, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. There wasn't. It had been closed, and there was not much left. But the track was still on the level crossing, I think. And we found some rail chairs with, I think they said DBR, Duffield Bank Railway on them. But anyway, that's another story. And so we got to got to Cunwyd, to the old mill, and then the next day, on the Sunday, which was the 31st of October 1948, we cycled to Bala, and then over the mountain road.
You came over the mountain, well.
Which was gated and had a grass strip along the middle between Rennig and Ffestiniog. And of course there was no road down Cwm Priso then. And we dropped down, of course, eventually past the Oakley Arms. I said, I want to go to Boston Lodge.
Had you planned this in your mind before
Pretty
you
well,
set
yes.
out?
John was quite interested, but not in the same way as me.
So you had your itinerary, which you were
so we didn't break in or anything, but we peered through the windows and saw these carriages like the Bow-Sider was there, because I'd seen photographs but never seen them, and there they were inside. They're still there, you see. So this was fantastic.
Wonderful.
And we peered. I think on that occasion we didn't get into the loco shed, but we could see little bits in through the window. And then
so what else did you see when you were there, when you were looking through the windows?
Well, of course, we could see Medd and Emrys, where she'd stood since 1946.
She was
and Welsh Pony was on the far road, but I don't think we actually broke in. We had just looked through the windows.
You did break in on one occasion.
Oh yes, later.
And
yes,
hid in a cupboard.
Oh, from 1949 onwards,
Yes.
I was breaking in regularly. Well, perhaps the doors by then, and
Maybe they'd been left ajar by then.
Well, yes. I avoided doing any damage, of course, but it was very easy to get in. If you went round the quarry face at Boston Lodge,
Yeah.
there were easy ways of access into the erection shop. And of course I could see Prince waiting for its 1944 boiler.
And did you know they were going to be in there, or was it a pure surprise to you when you glanced through the windows?
Read, you see. Yeah. Another point was that for my birthday, Christmas 1945, and I can still remember about 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, 1945, going in my stocking, Narrow Gauge Railways in North Wales by Charles E. Lee. Of course, I'd asked for this, you see. And so there I was reading it and looking at these double engines and asking my parents, what's this? What is it? Articulated. And it was Moyle Triven, of course, and it described it as an articulated engine. What is an articulated engine? Of course, it was a Fairley, wasn't it? And of course, the double engines are articulated. But I had that for my Christmas 1945. So, and even earlier, in the spring of 1945, I was walking along Deansgate in Manchester, past Tildesley and Holbrook's. It was a sports shop, but also had a railway section. And what was in the window but a little slim... I'd gone in there before for the ABC of the LMS and the LNDR, you see, which were both served Manchester. Because I was only living 10 miles out of Manchester, so Manchester was our main city. And what was there? But there was this orange-coloured book, an ABC, the ABC of minor British railway locomotives.
Ah.
So of course I went in. It was 1 and threepence, and of course the frontispiece was Welsh Pony. I think I mentioned this when we were up at the yacht. And of course all these lines were listed in there.
And they would have said where these engines probably still were, and then
the Ashover.
Absolutely.
So I went to the Ashover in 1948 and saw a steam train with a Baldwin on that.
How wonderful!
So,
wonderful.
So 1948 was a big year then. So here, and then when we went up on having left Boston Lodge, we went to the next overnight after Cunwyd. We had 2 nights at Snowdon Ranger, and of course that's right by the track of the Welsh Highland, but never in a 1,000 years did I ever think we'd see a train going along there again. But
did you walk on part of the track?
Oh
then?
yes, well of course we went again in the summer. On the 1st of November 1948, John and I climbed Snowdon, and I still think it was perhaps rather irresponsible of the warden there, who was a real scouse man, Joe Gianelli he was called. And we said, right, we're going up Snowdon, and he didn't bat an eyelid. And I don't know what I'd got on. I mean, if we were cycling, I wouldn't have thought we'd got boots. I don't know what.
No.
I can't remember, but and of course in '48 there wasn't the clothing, protective clothing. you got
Different
today.
world then, wasn't it?
And we climbed. The two of us climbed Snowdon right to the summit. Never saw a soul. There wasn't anybody at the summit, and we walked back down the railway to Llanberis, and we were absolutely soaked when we got to Llanberis. It wasn't heavy rain, but it was very wetting. So so that was another introduction. I think we were peering in at the loco shed at Llanberis on the Snowdon Mountain. Of course, there were no trains.
No.
And we got a Crosville bus to Carnarvon. And I remember spending £0.50 in W.H. Smith buying a book on the railway stations of North Wales. I've still got it there. And then we got a Whiteway, Williams Whiteway
Williams
bus
Whiteways, yes,
with
remember
a wooden
it.
seats. It
Yep.
was a wartime an OB, a wartime OB.
And they had their garage in Wineval.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that took us back to the hospital at Snowdon
Yeah.
Ranger.
So Robert, take us back to when you first met. How did that come about?
Well, I was on leave in the Air Force, and I was determined to walk the railway. I was staying at the Commercial Hotel. Dinner, bed and breakfast, and lunch, and a flask of tea, 18 shillings a night. Yes. And of course, I was only earning £5 a week at that time, so my father helped me, of course.
Yes.
And I walked across the cob and found the gates open. And I thought, that's strange, what's happening here? And then there were more gates by the toll gate.
Yes.
Because the arrangement was that they had to pay for the slate to come across the cob, whereas the passengers didn't, so these gates. And they were open too. So I thought, well, that's strange, because I walked this during the week. And I suddenly saw a lot of bad language going on. And I arrived to find Michael almost underneath the railway, and Leonard Heath Humphreys, which was the young man who started the railway. He was only 18 at the time, or younger than that.
17.
17 at the time. And Alan Garraway was on the tractor thing, and he was shouting it. He liked everybody to do what he wanted them to do.
Shall we just stop a moment there?
Here, yes, I've got the notes of volunteers, in which it says that voluntary assistance will get the railway going again and keep it running. But the railway is not a toy, and anyone wanting to play trains is not prepared to work hard is more of a hindrance than a help. Much of the work you may be asked to do will not be very interesting and probably will be very arduous, but it has got to be done and is just as important as other more interesting work.
And when was that letter written?
This was a general notice that Garraway produced, a notice for volunteers in 1954. So it hasn't got a date on, but...
And how many people do you think that would have gone out to at that time?
Well, it was only handed to you...
as you turned up,
yes.
So you were told in no uncertain terms, we want you to do a proper job, you're not going to...
Well, what did he say? He said that he didn't... he wasn't looking for railway enthusiasts, he wanted enthusiastic railway men.
Early in '55, I was asked to form the Midland Group, and I was given the list of people who had already signed up. apart from about 8 with the name Smallman on it. Because I've been around all my friends, you know, had relations. Come on, you must join. There must have been about 250 Midland people at that time.
And what were you actually signing up for? Were you
Well, as a Midland group to see
Yes.
if we could start our working parties.
so working parties,
Yeah.
financial support, or
Well, we had money in those days, you know.
Money was very short.
Yes,
Yes,
but
yeah.
we did. My father had a builder's merchant business, and we managed to get an old wagon from here, and we took it back to Birmingham, and repaired it. Well, it wasn't a repair; it was a complete rebuild, and that was one of the things we did.
and you had about 200 members within the Midlands area.
Yes, who'd signed up as members,
Yes.
but the working parties were sort of down to, well, 25,
Okay.
perhaps, you know.
So members in name only as supporters, but then 25 that would come out
Yes,
and do the
yes,
work.
I
and-
think
yeah.
you call them armchair work.
Yes.
members, And at that time, you got the Liverpool, Lancashire started, and the London people. And how it worked out was each group had a weekend. And so Alan Garraway every weekend had somebody to help him. And so we didn't know each other really. You know, the London people and the Lancashire people and the Birmingham people didn't really know each other. But we knew we were coming up that weekend.
But the very first, of course, when we met, you see, this was
yes.
prior to this organisation,
Right.
and I'd had the correspondence from the society to this 28th of November 1954. I got a letter from them, and I think there's an earlier one. Yes, the first communication was dated the 13th of July 1954. And it just says, we beg to acknowledge receipt of your communications. Please to forward further information as it becomes available. F. Gilbert, Honorary Secretary of the Ffestiniog Railway Society. That was the very beginning of it all.
And what was your communication? What were you actually asking them at the time?
Well, I'm just asking, you know, can one join? And so in November, this would be. I think this is the first, yes, the first newsletter. So here we have.
And these are all the original documents.
With Robert's
photograph. That's my photograph on
so that was dispatched to
That's
anybody.
wonderful.
That was posted on the 28th of November 1954.
Yes.
But that would be before I'd
What a
actually
lovely
joined.
thing to have.
So I knew something was happening on the railway. Because like Robert, I'd been doing national service, and I'd only finished my national service in September 1954.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd heard in the summer of '54 that something, the news, read in the Liverpool Daily Post that the railway had in fact changed hands, and this was when Pegler got control. So,
just Pegler, to explain who Pegler.
Alan Pegler.
Yeah.
Alan Pegler apparently knew nothing about the Ffestiniog Railway, but he had access to money.
Ah, always useful.
Now, of course, from 1949, certainly from 49 onwards, there were various attempts to rescue the railway as it was in this becoming ever more derelict, and there was this impasse due to the fact that the directors, the Davies family in Capelli, seemed quite incapable of. They didn't want to sell it, or they wanted the best price, and they thought that was from the scrap man. But then, of course, they then discovered that they couldn't get an abandonment order. This was, but that wouldn't actually have stopped them taking the tracker. But they thought that they didn't think they could. And people like James Boyd, the Narragator historian, he got involved, and he found a man up in the northeast, Edward Eustace Smith, who'd got a lot of money, and he persuaded Smith to make an offer, which he made a very good. It was about £15,000
Okay.
the whole thing. And they turned him down because they thought the directors were quite convinced that they could get more from the scrap man, and this is how it went on. You see, and I knew Boyd quite well because he lived. I'd bought again in 1949 for my 15th birthday. My auntie bought me narrow gauge rails to Port Maddock. And so I was absolutely hooked on all this. And I saw that James Boyd, Brooklands, Cheshire, well, I only lived 2 miles away, so I went round.
So you went round to see him?
I was only 15, but he was all right. And so I knew him the rest of his life, because he's only dead, 10 or 12 years.
Yes.
So, and he said to me, I think I've got a man with some money here. And of course I was still at school in 1950, but Easter 1950, Boyd said to me, now, I think we've got hold of the Ffestiniog, can you come and volunteer and do some work for us at Easter 1950? I reckon that I might be the first person, because the Towers Lynn, of course, Hayden Jones was still alive then, so I think I might be the first person to ever have been asked, would I volunteer to work on a railway?
That's quite a claim.
Yes, but of course in 51, a year later, Boyd changed his tune because Hayden Jones died he died in July 1950, and of course the end of 50 the railway shut, and of course it's well known that these Birmingham enthusiasts managed to rescue it.
Yes.
And I went working, as Robert did, in 1951 on the Towers Lynn Railway.
Yes.
But I soon gave it up when this started. Because
But you never met each other then in 51?
No. I was working with Tom Roltz, who was a well-known author, working with him in April 51, exactly 70 years ago, a couple of weeks ago.
I was there in the August, and waiting to go in the Air Force in September, and I was on my father sent me down there, and I wasn't quite 18, but I was allowed into the bar at night time, I met Alan Garraway for the first time, and Tom Rolt, who started the festival. And I heard him say quite clearly, if you start the Ffestiniog, and that was the first time I'd ever heard the word Ffestiniog.
Really?
If you start the Ffestiniog, there aren't enough volunteers to run both.
So that was a bit of a warning off then, really.
It really was, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we did start, and the Talathin and Ffestiniog fell out because of it, because you weren't getting enough volunteers. And then all of a sudden, the Welshpool Land Railway started.
A bit later, though, wasn't it?
Yes, and the Talathin and Ffestiniog. Oh my God! Where the volunteers, because it was nearer to Birmingham, you see.
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
And we thought that all the volunteers would go there instead of us. But we all kept.
That was several years later.
You were quite faithful to your own railway, were you?
Yes.
Well, of course.
We were all friends in the end.
Well, I started on the Towers Lynn because that was the only one you could work on. But of
that's
course,
right.
once things happened here, I did.
So you jumped ship from Towers Lynn and...
Oh, yes.
But interestingly, you might like to see this. This goes back to 1949, when on the occasion that I came in the summer with my friend on the bikes, you see, and we stayed at Stoughton Ranger, I wrote in advance to the general manager of the Ffestiniog Railway to ask could we go around Boston Lodge Works, and that was the response I got.
So this is 23rd of May 1949. I am in receipt of your letter of the 18th. Owing to the serious damage done to the company's property at our Boston Lodge Works by souvenir hunters and others. Yes. We have had to lock the works up with the keys at this office, and the place is now under police protection, who have instructions to prosecute any person found trespassing on the premises. So under the circumstances, I regret being unable to allow you to visit the works as desired.
Yeah.
R. Evans, manager, 23rd of May 1949.
So that was my first connection with the FR officially.
But that didn't stop you turning up at Boston Lodge on your bike a bit.
I was watching out and wondering if the Merionethshire policeman might be
Yes.
lurking in the
The first
shadows.
time I got to Boston Lodge, it was all locked up. And I was rattling doors and things like this, and a hand fell on my shoulder.
Oh, yes.
And I looked round, and he had a dog collar. Oh my God, you know, and a hammer in his hand. Not it was, you know,
Not in threat.
no, but he had hammer and nails in his cassock, and he was going round, not, you know, making sure that nobody could get in. And I said to he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'd love to look." Certainly, he said. He brought a huge key out, and he went in, and it was just like the Sleeping Beauty's place, you know. Everything was there. The day they stopped, they just put their tools down, and it was amazing to go in there, you know. and see.
Can you remember what date that was, when that would have been?
Oh, that would be
52.
52,
Ah,
53, something like that.
Yes.
And he was very kind.
That's the Reverend Tim Phillips.
Tim Phillips, yes, and he lived in one of the cottages.
Okay, yeah.
You know where the engine shed in the
Boston Lodge cottages.
Yes.
in the number 3.
I know exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And he took you in and showed you round, or
That's
yeah.
right, yes.
Yeah.
And I was just aghast at what I was seeing, you know, because Prince was they'd already started on Prince. They'd done all the bottom parts.
In the
And
war.
there was a boiler there, and the boiler had arrived what was it?
1944.
Yes, just
Daniel Adamson of Duckinfield.
yes, and the boiler had arrived about a month before the railway closed.
No, it was a bit longer than that, I'm
Right.
told.
Yes, it wasn't.
1944.
Yes,
And so the boiler was just sitting there
Yes.
sitting there, yes.
alongside
Well,
Welsh Pony, yeah.
Evans tried to sell it.
Did he?
Oh yes, in 1945-6, when things were getting very, they could see this thing was, can't we sell this boiler? Perhaps the Great Western would like it for one of their ride lanes. How ridiculous! The boiler was especially ordered for a small England engine.
So jumping forward again, so you're both members of your various areas, and then you turn up for this working party weekend.
Yes, you
and
see,
then-
so I was involved with the Lancashire and Cheshire group.
Right.
So we had a chap called Bob Hunter, who was very good at getting people organised, and he set us up in June 1956 in Manchester, and just looking at the little memorial there to John, what's he called? Chap in Powell, John Powell.
oh yes,
Yes.
Well, of course, I knew John's father far better than I knew the son. Actually, I used to meet John, but John Powell was a wonderful man, and he got on the committee with us in Manchester for the Lancashire and Cheshire group, and he was quite high up on BR. And we used to have the committee meetings in the old Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway boardroom at Victoria Station.
My
Manchester.
word, very plush.
Unspanked, yes.
Yeah.
And so that went on for 3 or 4 years. So we gathered several people from the northwest, and of course I wasn't a driver. I had no car, and people like Ian Smart. We've heard of Ian Smart.
I've heard the name. Yes, but
He had a wonderful. He was very good at diesel engines, and he was a great asset down here, of course. And I met him on his first visit, and he said, "Where do you live?" And, Altrincham. Oh, he said, "I'm in Wimslow. Would you like a lift back?" And of course, I'd come by train, you see,
Yes.
and it was very tedious coming all the way by train. And so he had this wonderful Humber Super Snipe with a Perkins diesel engine, which he fitted himself. And he regularly brought me down then on these working parties, or just the two of us to do work. And a very generous man. He wouldn't hear of contribution to the fuel or anything.
How nice.
He wasn't
Yeah.
short of money. Well, he was in a family
Yeah.
textile business in Manchester, and of course he had access to the firm's lorry, and he came down and I joined him one Saturday morning. Very tedious because the lorry would really go at 25 miles an hour, and we drove all the way from Manchester to Portmaddock to bring back the speeder.
Yes.
Became known as Buster. It was a Welsh Highland petrol. Colonel Stevens had acquired it for the Welsh Highland as an inspection trolley, and it was still in Boston Lodge. And Alan Garraway was anxious to have some sort of inspection trolley. So Ian Smart, being very clever with engines, we drove down in his lorry and loaded it up, and
Brought it along?
He brought it back to his works in Manchester and got working on it. And only about 3 weeks later, he said, "Are you coming back with me?" And it's all done.
And it was ready. Wow.
It only had 2 speeds, fast and very fast.
It was a desperate thing to go on with.
So-
We had some good fun with it.
I can imagine. So can you both remember your first bit of work you did as a volunteer on the
Actually, it happened on a Saturday. We'd managed to get through the Penryn, the gates,
Yes.
and we were bowling along quite happily, and suddenly we found a fence in front of us.
Yeah.
And one of the little houses had built a fence so that they could move across the track. And so we started dismantling it, you see, and throwing the stone all round. And by that time it was about 5 o'clock, and so we decided to go back. And in the pub that evening we talked about what we were going to do. And we thought, right, we'll go very early in the morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning, and rush up there and see if we can clear it. And so we finished clearing it and then went back to the commercial.
Went for breakfast, yes.
And when we came up later on, the owner was quite happily building the wall back up where
Rebuilding.
it should be, and waved very kindly at us, you know.
Yeah, we had some great fun, yes. And of course,
Yes.
of course the line was so heavily overgrown from Penryn to Tannabull that it took several weekends. But
Well, we got to Caimar very easily, didn't
yes,
we?
but
And then-
Ian
yeah.
Smart, I mentioned,
Yes.
who
Yes.
brought the wagon. He and I, Alan said, "Wonder if you can get that." There was a flat wagon here in the siding. He said, "I wonder if you can bring it down." But of course the line was still terribly overgrown. So I think there's no doubt that Ian Smart and I were brought down the first railed vehicle of the new era from Tannabull to Penryn, hoping to do it by gravity, but it was hopeless. It was the vehicle itself hadn't been greased in years, and of course the growth. But so we ended up pushing it most of the way. Once or twice we got going and wondered how to stop the damn thing because I don't think there was any brake on it, but we had to abandon it at the top side of the level crossing at Penryn.
Right. Yeah.
So that was the first occasion that a railed vehicle had been from Tannabull to Penryn since 1946.
And what date would that have been? When?
So that was in January 1955.
55.
Yes, and of course we got to Penryn and had to find a taxi to take us back to Tannabull station where Ian's car was. So.
No ponies you could get on to go back.
No.
So that was another incident from those.
And then we moved on to about 1955 when the first trains was done.
Yes.
And the steam engine wasn't ready either. I arrived there for the weekend from Whitby, and Alan Garraway said, "Right, you're in charge of the refreshments." And so I became the first refreshment manager. And the refreshments were pop, And there was a place in Portmatic that made pot.
R.M. Jones.
R.M. Jones, yes.
Cambrian mineral.
And I was sold crisps as well. Now I can't remember exactly how much we but I know we paid tuppence back on the bottle when
Yes,
we came
yeah.
back. The excitement, it sounds all mad now, but the excitement was going round the station after they'd all gone, picking up the empty bottles.
Because you take them back and get the tuppences on them.
Well, yes, adding to the fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so who were you selling them to? Who was on this first train then?
Quite a lot of people had turned up.
That's the local people.
The locals, and it was holiday time, of course, you see. And there was a sign out by the road which said "Trains today." And then I'd finished in the Air Force in August, my father said, "Oh, you better go down to Portmatic." He paid me to pay the hotel bill.
Right.
So I got down there on the Friday night, I think it was, and Alan turned up and see Mrs. Owen, the owner there, and he came back with the keys. And he said to me, "Tomorrow you are in charge of selling tickets." Huh? You can go down and open up the station. So there was I in grey trousers and a a blazer with a RAF badge on, looking very smart, and a tie. I walked down the high street. I thought I was the cat's whiskers.
So you've been promoted at this stage.
Oh yes, yes. So I went and opened up, and it was wonderful. The drawers opened with little wooden drawers to take the money, And he said to me, "Now you are not to sell any tickets until you see me coming." Because
You wouldn't be sure if the loco was.
Make sure it was going to work.
Yes,
Yeah.
he spent a lot of night times there,
Burning the midnight oil.
making sure it was right.
Ready to go. Yeah.
And the train arrived, and there was quite a lot of people on the platform. Now, are you going to run a train? Oh yes, I think so, but you'll have to wait. But anyway, we sold the tickets, locked up the office. Then I had to go around clipping the tickets and locking the doors, and off we went. I was in the guard, you see.
So you had several different hats.
Oh yes, and so we got as far as Boston Lodge Halt, and everybody out, and then we backed down the train, and then they had a chain shunt.
This would enable the engine to get to the other end of the train, you see, because there was no loop.
So I was then the shunter. Back up again, and everybody loaded it, and we clipped the tickets again.
Well, the hazard, though, that you don't mention was that
yes.
it was called a chain shunt. And it was a very dangerous business because there was no loop, you see, at Boston Lodge.
Yeah.
And so to get the loco round the carriages, there was some gravity work and a chain. And of course you had to be terribly careful because you could get your fingers trapped in this chain.
Oh my
No,
word.
no gloves or anything like that.
It's no safety equipment at
Health
all.
and safety would have an absolute
Boots? Any boots?
No,
or
no. And Alan shouting at us, don't forget too. You know?
Yes, yeah.
Oh yes. And anyway, we got back and we locked everybody else in the train. And halfway across the cop, there was Will Jones,
Will Jones, yes.
and one or two volunteers. They were changing.
Re-sleepering.
Re-sleeping.
Yes.
And we waved at them.
Yeah.
We got back to the station. There were some more people there, so we had another ride.
So, how long was each ride taking?
Just about an hour.
Just about an hour. Yeah.
Just about, 1 shilling.
It was a shilling return.
That's what I was going to ask. How much?
Yes.
1 shilling. We got 10,000 tickets printed.
Yes.
And I've still not discovered where he got them from because they weren't a standard size. They were very slightly. I mean, that's a standard railway ticket, you see.
Yes.
Edmondson, the
Yes.
famous Edmondson card. And they were very slightly smaller than that.
Yes.
So where he got them from, I don't know. But of course, for the following year, he said to me, "Now, at the beginning of 1955, I offered to dispose to collectors surplus tickets of that description, you see. And so I spent the next 12 months or so selling through the post surplus tickets, which I reckon there were about 400,000 tickets. We didn't tell collectors that. But
so this is nothing to do with the 10,000 that was printed up for those rides. These are the previous tickets from pre-war.
There were no tickets from Portmarnock to Boston Lodge printed, you see, so that's what we needed. This sort of thing, Boston Lodge didn't feature. So what Alan Garraway did, how he got these tickets, I never discovered, but I've still got one of them. But there was a shilling return.
I wonder if it was Stevenson who did them.
No, they weren't really ticket printers. But I disposed of hundreds of the old stock and raised quite a fair sum. In today's money, it would be into thousands of pounds. It was several £100s, which was desperately needed. So I was quite busy doing that in 1955.
And these were just to your contacts, or?
Well, the company gave me a float, and I advertised in the railway magazine.
Yes.
And people wrote to me at my home address, you see, and any postages and things I could claim if I wished back on the company. So I was sending cheques off fairly regularly, which were very well received. And as a result of that, you of course also, I was issued with a first class pass on the Ffestiniog Railway for life.
Oh, wonderful.
And I've still got it. In fact, I've got it on me somewhere.
And Michael, you've got a telegram. Alan sent you.
Yes, Alan sent, when the railway opened in July '55, of course, there was much doubt as to whether the inspector would permit the opening, because it had to be inspected. And this telegram seems to be quite unique, because I don't know why, but for some reason.
The Ffestiniog at that time was allowed to use the telegraph system for no charge, because the lines were used on the railway line, you see.
All railway telegrams, you go into a telegraph office at a station in those days, and you paid, of course, but the railway company didn't pay, because it was an arrangement with the post office.
And they're going up their line.
As applied to the Ffestiniog Railway. And so I got a telegram, and of course my mother had a fit when the telegraph boy came up the path, because she was quite sure that somebody had kicked the bucket. That was the usual reason for getting a telegram.
Yes.
But it was a telegram to say that the railway was reopening tomorrow or something.
Yeah, 21st of July, 1955.
And that was
Inspection satisfactory. Opening Saturday afternoon, Alan.
Yes. So
that was it, you were off.
So that was the telegram to me to tell me that it was...
That must have been so exciting at the time.
Oh my goodness me, yes, that first day. And then we, moving on just a little bit, I was asked to, because I'd already started the Midland Group,
Yes.
why don't you join the board, the directors of the society? So I did, and I was voted on at the next meeting. And we had our meetings at Euston Station.
Right.
There used to be a wonderful, the Great Hall. A scandal. It was
I was going to say in the old Euston Station, yes. Yeah.
And you walked in, and there was a great big staircase, marble staircase, and all round the top was offices, balcony. And you walked into one of the rooms, and it was the locomotive superintendent's office. A huge table there, and it was rather like Harry Potter's school, with all around the walls. And we'd hold our meetings there. It was very posh, you know. And at that time, the chairman was Colonel Rudgard.
Oh yes, he was the old school.
Yes, a real gentleman.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, he was lovely, absolutely lovely.
He was the first chairman of the society, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yes, for a short period.
So having run these first trains successfully, did that then become a regular thing from that moment on? Or?
Oh, yes.
Well, each season we got a bit further.
Yes,
Boston
yeah.
Lodge was the terminus in 1955, but we were working hard all that winter, and that's up to Minfors.
Yes.
And so in June 56, we were able to run the train to Minfors, which had a proper loop, of course.
Yes.
And had the ticket prices gone up for that extra
yes.
distance?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What I forgot to mention was, of course, that on the 6th of November 1954, the directors wanted some publicity about the reopening, and so we ran a special train. Robert Evans, the man that signed this,
In the
Robert
letter,
Evans
yes.
had joined the company in 1894, and so he'd done 60 years, and so Alan Pegler, who'd become the new chairman of the FR, invited Robert Evans to a special train and to a meal in the Queen's Hotel opposite by the Cambrian station in Fort Madoc to celebrate, and he was presented with a clock, and this was to celebrate his 60 years service with the FR, and we managed to run a train for this occasion to Minfors. But of course, the line was in a very bad state, and we were actually several of us were pushing the carriage over the Weybridge crossing. It was badly choked with slate dust.
And were there journalists on board this?
Oh yes,
or,
it was quite well. Yes,
Yeah.
he got the newspaper A Cymro covered it very well. And so there's lots of photographs of that,
Yeah.
and Robert and I appear in those, and Robert Evans, of course, the little man, is there. Because he'd always said that this railway would never run again. You see.
And there it was.
So that was November 1954.
He joined the railway, and his first pay was 2 and 6pence a week.
Really?
Yes.
2 and 6.
Yes. I think he was about 17 or 18 at the time, something like that.
So having had that association, both of you, with the railway going back to the late 40s, early 50s, pick out some highlights of your time over that period of time which really you think of fondly in your memory, or perhaps things which aren't so fond because something went wrong, but just some highlights.
Yes. The Sunday afternoon trains were rather fun because at that time Sundays was dry in this area.
Of course, yes.
Yes. And so the locals, who still weren't really sure about us, because they thought,
Lots of animosity.
English people,
Up at Minor, there was a lot of animosity.
but they found out that we could serve beer on a moving train.
Yes.
And so the afternoon train was absolutely packed. And of course, it came up as far as wherever we were. I think we got through to Tannebolk at that time. By the time we got down to Minfors, everybody was busting. So we allowed the train to stop, and we all ran down onto the Cambrian and peed onto the track. Oh dear me!
Well, there was of course a gents, but it's still there.
We're still there, the old slate urinals here, yes.
Yes,
Urinal.
yes.
But
So no longer pop. This was all beer by this stage, then.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then of course the special trains. We had a special train nearly every year from Paddington.
on the main line to
Yes.
bring members to the AGM,
Yeah,
AGM
yes,
specials. Yes.
And on one occasion, the directors, very posh they were, they had a sleeping car on the back, added to it.
Because it went back overnight.
And, there were two Duke dogs on the front. And Minforth is on a hill, so they balanced the train very carefully on it, and Alan Galloway allowed a train to come up, bringing after the meeting. And we were all on the train, and they had a bar car, absolutely super. It was the full coach at the bar right along it, with stalls. And we were drinking there, and somebody banged the coach. Everybody off, who should be off, you see.
It was setting off from Paddington, you see.
And nobody took any notice of it, of course. And off went the train. And about 8 or 9 on the train. Oh, and a naughty boy, Peter Jarvis. He was a really naughty boy. He was. He's older than us, in actual fact. Had got bangers,
detonators.
Right, all the way down the track. He'd done it. Of course, off the train, when they were bang, 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 bang. You see. And halfway down the hill, somebody pulled the...
Because they weren't supposed to be on the train.
So they pulled the emergency cord.
Yes.
The cord, and the crew were furious.
The language, we were about 5 coaches back, we could hear them shouting.
They couldn't get the brakes off, you see.
All in Welsh, of course, so we didn't understand what they were saying. And that was... they all jumped down onto the line and...
Got off before it headed off.
And then, of course, we travelled on, and when we got to Mahancliffe, of course, then it's quite steep up there, you know. And about halfway up, there's gates, and the little lady there who lives in the house had to open the gates, you see, for the train.
This was at 1 o'clock in the morning or something.
Yeah, and she wasn't given the instructions this was going to happen.
Oh no.
So of course she must have woken up in the middle of the night, the gates going in all directions. By the time we got back to Birmingham, I got out of the train, and the bar car had got scratches all along it. No. And there was a hell of a row from
There'd be an inquiry about that.
There was.
I can imagine.
Never allowed again.
Well, was it read somewhere an association with the investiture, the Prince of Wales investiture?
Oh,
was it?
Yes,
Yes. By that time, I'd been thrown out of my house because, all sorts of horrid things had happened. And I bought a little house up in... I got no money. And I bought a little house up in Glenapus, just by the crossing.
Yes.
And for £200. I hadn't got £200, so I went to the Midland Bank, and the manager said, "Oh yes, you're working for the Ffestiniog Railway. I'll give you the 500." After he'd given it me, do you know that you could get a grant of £2,000 to put a bathroom and kitchen in and an inside loo? Oh no, thank you very much. So that was done. And all of a sudden I found that the house on the one side was for sale. And he came and knocked on my door. He said, "Will you buy this house?" And I said, "Yes." "Oh, you can't have it as cheap as the last one. 250. So I went up to the Midland Bank, and by this time he was a lovely man. He washed his hands and he said, "Indeed, indeed," he said. And he lent me the money, and I then found a chap called Harold Creamer, who had a little building business here, and he came up and knocked the 2 houses together for me. And he found out that I was interested in stamps. "Oh," he said, will you come and help me? I've just started the stamps from the railway." So he had a farm just about behind here.
Llachwan.
Yes.
No, Llachwan, yeah.
Yes. Sheep farm.
Yep. Yeah.
So at the evenings I'd go up there and just stick stamps on. And it was the same year as the Prince of Wales investiture.
Right.
And so we were making covers for this. 4,000 covers we did.
Good Lord.
And my mouth was dry by that time. But they were very kind. I used to stay the night, in actual fact. Well, the night before the investiture, the postmaster said, "Look, you've got to get the covers to me on the day."
This is in Carnarvon.
absolute rubbish really, could any time. So at about 1 o'clock in the morning, we'd just about finished, and he had a Volvo estate car. And we piled all the boxes into the estate car and started driving. Well, we were told that because the Royal Train was there,
Yes.
there was a ring of steel round Carnarvon. So, you know the post office is right in the very centre.
It is, yes.
So there we drove there, and they were waiting for us. So we unloaded all these boxes and turned round and drove back home again. Never saw a soul.
So much for the ring of steel.
Yes.
On August Bank Holiday Monday 1956,
Right.
this is when the railway had just reached Menford, you see. And of course, occasionally, a special train would make its way up the line, which was very exciting because the line was still terribly overgrown. And an aunt of mine was having a short holiday in Borthagest. She lived in Birkenhead.
Right.
And I was going back, and so I said, well, I'll come back. I'd finished the work, and so I said, well, we'll travel back on the Monday. So we got on the FR train at Portmaddock Harbour and came to Menford, you see. And then the idea then was to get the Croswell bus to Blaina and the train to Bala
Ah, yes.
and to Raben and Chester and home, you see. Well, we got to Menford, and what should be standing in the station at Menford but this the Moylwyn tractor on a passenger carriage, that number 2 brake, the third brake with 2 compartments in it, and some wagons, and they were going up to Blaina. Something to do with collecting poles, something to do with the telegraph line. So Garraway was at Menford with the passenger train, so I said to Alan, my aunt and I want to do the Blaina. Oh, he said, get in it. So she'd got a suitcase, and so we got in one of the 2 compartments, and we set off. We'd come from the harbour station, so we went right through the old tunnel, the old Moylwyn tunnel, right up, but we couldn't get into Blaina itself because I think the Glenaprush crossing was still some problem on it. So we walked into the town, and we got on the Great Western train, and so I think we can definitely say that my auntie was the only person ever to travel from Portmaddock to Birkenhead on the Ffestiniog and the Great Western Line since 1939.
Wonderful.
That was 1956.
Yes.
Yes.